True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I want to thank you all for being here. Wanted to do a special episode on the Rust trial. It's kind of been dubbed that, but obviously the person that is in trial right now, and tomorrow we should start testimony, hopefully after opening statements, is Alec Baldwin. That's who is facing charges. But before we get into the trial, the legalities, some things that have happened, I want to talk about the victim. First and foremost, the reason I'm on this platform to begin with, and I think I share this with many of you all, it's because of our victim advocacy. We look out for the victims and for hopefully helping to get justice for the victims by talking about their stories, by keeping their faces and their names in the public. And that includes our missing, and it certainly includes people like Halyna Hutchins. So let me talk a little bit about her. She was born in 1979 in the Ukraine. And she's kind of an interesting background that some of you also might have. She was literally kind of a military brat. Well, let me put it this way. That's what she dubbed herself, is sort of a military brat. Her father was in the Russian Navy. They grew up in an Arctic military base, and that's where she grew up. She ended up going to college and receiving a journalism degree and really getting involved in the arts. She loved theater, loved being behind the scenes, and of course, ultimately was involved in cinematography. She met her husband over here in the United States. His name was Matthew, and they fell in love, and they were married 16 years. 16 years. And the reason that, to me, this is such, I guess, a big accomplishment is she was in the movie industry. And how hard is it oftentimes for people to maintain, positive, healthy relationships with their husbands and their, boyfriends, the people they love. It's very difficult, right? You're on set, you work very late hours, you're around very interesting people. Halyna, look, she was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I've seen so many pictures of her, and even though she looks the same, she looks so different. She could be in a hat. I always see these pictures of her in these different hats, and it seems she really loved to wear hats, but she was beautiful. One of those people, unlike me, right? I have hair, a lot of hair. I like my hair. She was beautiful with not a spot of hair. If she wanted, she could have short hair, long hair, because her face was so electrifying. I don't know how else to say it other than that. She really had a beautiful command presence, but she wasn't only beautiful, she was very talented. I found out that she actually was one of the top 10, and I want to say this right because this is quite an accolade. She received top 10 in 2019 accolade from the American Film Institute, up and coming cinematographers, apparently. That's a really big accolade. The other thing that I didn't really understand was apparently cinematography, and for somebody who's never been in this industry, I guess it's really hard for women to break into. It's a very male-dominated industry. And she was actually one of only two, I found out, that had some of the roles in terms of cinematography, she was one of the few women that was able to really receive these types of jobs and roles. She actually studied at the American Film Institute, which got here, which was also extremely difficult and quite prestigious, apparently, to get into and to study under. She had a beautiful son named Andros. That's who she survived by, her husband of 16 years, Andros, her family, her Ukrainian family, her mother. For those of you who watched her mother give the victim statement in the Gutierrez, who was the armor in this case when it came down to sentencing, heart-wrenching. I mean, you can tell the relationship between Halyna and her mother was one of those mother-daughter relationships that is so bound. She said basically her life was over when she got that call, and the call came in, and this was just breathtaking. The words that were spoken to her was, I believe, Halyna is no more. Heart-wrenching. I think in so many of these cases, we just really forget about the victims, who died. We all are interested to know in what happened. We're always interested to know who's going to pay, who's not going to pay, should anybody pay, especially in a case like this that's a manslaughter charge. We're all very interested in that. But oftentimes, we just forget about this beautiful life that was snuffed out. She was only 42 years old. She died on October 21st, 2021. I think that's really important because here we've gone almost 3 years to find justice. Because remember, this family is mourning. They're mourning the loss of a mother, of a wife, of a sibling, and of a daughter. And it was clear to me her relationships that she made were really amazing and really strong. And so I definitely wanted to start out with just saying, first and foremost, Halyna was an amazing woman by all accounts. And she's no longer with us, and somebody needs to pay for that. Now, people can say, Jen, this was an accident, because this is something that was hugely brought out, right? In other words, why should Alec Baldwin, why should he be held at all responsible when he was on a movie set? He was handed a prop gun. He had a prop specialist and an armor that was supposed to hand him a safe gun. He was actually handed the gun by one of the assistant directors, and that assistant director said it's cold, meaning it's safe. He would later say he didn't really check it. He pled and received, I believe, a 6-month suspended sentence. So he got off light on this, but in all reality, he was, as the assistant director, he certainly had a duty to check that weapon because it was handed from the armor to him and then from him to the actor. He should have checked it closely, but he didn't check it closely. But his role was certainly more as an intermediary as opposed to somebody that was in charge of the weapons, which was the armor. Nevertheless, he's the assistant director on that set. And I want to point out, too, that, of course, Alec Baldwin was the producer. He's the man. He's the head honcho. He's the one where really the buck stops. But this is a good segue. Because of the ruling that occurred, this judge has said there can be no evidence or information pertaining to Alec Baldwin's role as the producer of this film. And again, the film name is Rust. A Western, very low budget film, by the way. And that is just it's a huge win for the defense. Listen, these defense attorneys, they're good. They're not, like like some of the used car salesmen, snake oil salesman type demeanors that we've seen in recent trials. But they're so competent. And the fact that they got this not to be allowed is huge. Why it's huge, I think, is because when you look at the person in charge, overall in charge, no matter what it is, a producer in a film, or the manager of a baseball team, or the coach of a basketball team. I'm going into sports because I'm such a sports fanatic. The manager of a restaurant, no matter what it is, the buck stops with them, the person in charge. But they're not going to be able to tell these jurors that he was overall in charge of the set and of the production of Rust, where this horrible accident occurred. And unfortunately, I think that's very unfortunate, because I think the jury had the right to know that. From what the legal standpoint, though, they narrowed it down to really the action of Alec Baldwin and what he did to cause this death. So it does, that was the prevailing, I think, philosophy from this judge. So let's take us back to what really happened. It's been very confusing for those of you who had followed this case from the beginning as to how rounds that are not blanks even got on this set. Should have never been there. Let's keep in mind that Halyna Gutierrez, who was the armorer, although she was the daughter of a somewhat famous set armorer, and that's apparently how she got this job at a young age, and she was, by accounts, using cocaine and probably not very responsible. And even the court found in her case that she really didn't have the necessary time, supposedly. I guess she had a lot of hats. She was in charge of a lot of props and was the armorer. So this was a lot for her to do correctly. Really grade A type armorers that could have been hired weren't hired or did not want the job because of safety violations and other issues that were perceived. So in any event, again, low budget, low quality of an armor. And for some reason, live rounds were around on that set. Now, let me set the stage for you. In firearms, whenever you're handling firearms, and particularly, I'm going to refer to FBI training, right? Or even local training, because I was very much involved in also the LETS program, the Law Enforcement Training for Street Survival, training local departments, because they don't get funded and they don't get any training. So the Bureau has a special program. And I was actually so honored to be a part of that program. Your background, you had to be a SWAT certified agent, and you had to be a firearms instructor. And so obviously it was difficult to become a LETS instructor. And, we took that training so seriously, giving that training, because we knew that possibly it could save somebody's life on scenario-based training that we taught. So in any event, when we're looking at Halyna Gutierrez, she was definitely not well trained. And whenever you are around both what we call simunition, simulated ammunition, and ammunition, whether you're in a training environment or a movie set, no live ammunition is ever allowed. So as an example, if you're training officers and agents, everything, you lock it in the car. It can't be anywhere near where you train. Now, when I teach, and I teach a lot of simunitions, I have a class called A Day at Quantico. Quantico is the FBI Academy where they train, Quantico, Virginia. I try to simulate the training that we received, at least 8 hours of it. And when we switch from, we do firearms in the morning, and in the evening we do, or in the afternoon, I should say, up until the evening, we do SIMS training, simunitions training, with either high-powered airsoft guns or other, we don't really use the paintball guns as much. We use simunitions because I like it to feel and look and handle like a real gun. So in any event, everything has to stay locked up. That's real. Why? Exactly because of this. You can't mix them together because there's a possibility that you could put a live round in. Now, they look so very different. I posted this on my Twitter at Coffindaffer FBI for any of you who do go on Twitter and who don't know my handle. Would love to have you on the platform. It's the area behind the casing. So the casing is what encases the gunpowder and the bullet. It's all crimped, and it's very discernible. I really, if I do another segment on this, I'm going to use a revolver. I'm going to show what Alec Baldwin says happened. I'm going to show what the FBI armors say could not have happened. And then I also want to show blank versus a live round so you guys can see how distinctive it is. It's so distinctive, there's no way you can tell them apart, or couldn't tell them apart. It's literally almost like black and white. It's not quite that bad, but it's pretty close to that bad. You can't interchange them. So this was a huge failure, first of all, that any live ammunition was on that set. Second failure was that that gun was loaded with live ammunition. It's mind-boggling how any armor, or really almost anyone, even if you didn't have firearms training, you would look down and you'd say, geez, this one looks completely different from this one, and you'd ask the armor. But how this gun was loaded with live ammunition is mind-boggling. So first of all, no ammo ever on a set or ever in a training environment, period. Point number 2, look at the ammunition that goes in a revolver. So a revolver spins around and has a wheel and has little slots where the bullets slide into, and then you close it, and then that way it is ready and available to be fired. So two huge missteps here. Hannah Gutierrez's page, she's going to serve 18 months of her life. She is not going to testify. She says, I don't want to testify. And quite frankly, I don't blame her. I don't blame her. She's not testifying, I think, for 2 reasons. Number one, they took her to trial. She went to trial and she didn't get a sentence reduction. They asked for the hammer after she, for her to be sentenced to the full 18 months, which was what was eligible for her to be sentenced to. Now, I want to real quickly digress just for 1 second and say Halyna Hutchins lost her life at 42 years old. She left behind all these people she dearly loved and that cry for her. And one of the people really responsible for this only got 18 months. So I don't know if people are feeling sorry for her. I can't wait to look at the chat, but I don't feel sorry for her. I don't feel sorry for Hannah Gutierrez one bit, because when she took that paycheck, when she took that job isn't like, listen, you're responsible for having the proper cowboy hat that he's going to wear. Yes, that was part of it. But she was responsible for guns, ammunition, deadly items. So the fact she's only going to serve 18 months compared to a whole life, years and years, not seeing your children grow up, not having a mother to be there for you, it's big. So I believe Halyna Gutierrez should have probably gotten more, but that's under the statute, fair enough. When this case first was filed, it was funny because Chris Cuomo asked me on the show to comment about it. And I very much believed that Alec Baldwin should be charged. This was before he was charged. And Chris Cuomo did not believe he should be charged. And remember, Chris Cuomo is an attorney, went to Yale. So he's no slouch when it comes to legalese and law. And he comes from a family of attorneys. And he mentioned that, they felt he shouldn't. I told him I felt that he should be charged. Why? Because but for that pulling of the trigger, Halyna Hutchins would be here. Now, many of you say, well, geez, if I'm an actor and I'm handed a gun, why would I ever check it? But this is why you check it. A couple reasons. Number one, this wasn't a prop. This wasn't a simunitions gun. It wasn't an airsoft gun. It wasn't a BB gun. Everyone knew this gun fired bullets. Now, believe me, I still do not understand, why you have a situation where you could have a death like this occur. And this isn't the first time it's happened. It's happened before on set. And I think it's just so dangerous when other weapons could be used that could simulate a live fire weapon. But nevertheless, he knew it was a live fire weapon. Second of all, he's handled weapons a lot on scene, a lot on different scenes. In fact, the prosecution is going to get let in how he treated guns. And I can tell you it's absolutely haphazard. It is not safe. He was disregarded every safety rule there is, which there's very few safety rules that you can never go against. One is you cannot point the gun at anyone unless you are justified to shoot them. And I want to remind everybody, this wasn't part of the scene. This wasn't like the shootout and, he's got a bad guy here and he's the bad guy and he's shooting. They weren't even filming, is my understanding. He just, and they have other examples, he liked to shoot off these guns. Believe me, I've seen it. I have classes. One of the classes I had that was actually one of the funnest classes, there were 6 business owners where I live, and they all wanted to go to gun training. And where I train at, I have several places I train, but one place I trained, it's actually a pretty famous baseball player that played for the Phillies. And he owns 30 acres and he built a firing range. Now, it's rudimentary, but he has a berm and he has places I could set up targets and hang milk cartons and set up all these combat courses. And we have a lot of fun out there. And when you go out to these types of ranges, sometimes you have people that are so enthusiastic, even though I have very strict rules, like you're not even allowed to shoot until I give the command to shoot. And some guys, I tell you, it's something, I will say, is the line ready? The line is ready. And then fire is the command at which they're allowed to fire. So is the line ready? The line is ready. And the people start shooting. I'm like, guys, no. Wait until you hear the command fire. And the reason is everybody else is waiting for that command fire. And maybe somebody drops around and they know the fire command hasn't gone. They make the mistake of reaching out down and they get in that line of fire. Maybe somebody drawing up their weapons. So anyway, there are all these safety rules. I don't want to digress too much into that side of it, into the firearm safety, but it's very important. You just can't point a gun at somebody unless you are justified to shoot them. Second, you never have your finger on the trigger unless you intend to fire. It's as simple as that. So on the set, and they showed this at some of the hearings, you see him with his finger on the trigger. Well, the problem with your finger on the trigger is your hand has sympathetic response. So in other words, if I take my right hand, or say my left hand because I'm right-handed, if I take my left hand and I grab something, so I grab an apple or I grab my pants, and I have my right hand, I have a gun in my right hand, I have that finger on the trigger, there's a sympathetic response that when your left hand does something, your right hand also does something. It's to a lesser degree. But you're capable then of having what we call an AD, an accidental discharge, causing that gun to fire without even meaning to because of this sympathetic response reaction. So that's why it's imperative you never have your finger on the trigger until the moment you're going to shoot. And again, you need to be justified to shoot, target practice or other situations, certainly in law enforcement, where you're justified. But whenever you go in and you clear a house, and you can watch this on some of the footage that you'll see in terms of individuals who are in training or live individuals in our true crime scenarios, right? You have true crime scenarios, and you'll see that that officer had the finger on the trigger. I mean, I saw one actually recently. I think it was from several years ago, but I saw it recently where he had a guy proned out. He wanted to arrest him, and he walked over to him, and his finger's on the trigger, and he accidentally shot the guy. Again, he didn't want to kill this guy. It blew up in the papers, but he accidentally killed him. And I bring this up because that's why you have this imperative safety rule. The third imperative safety rule, and there's only 3, and if you can just not do these things, you will never have an accidental issue. And that is, you must treat all weapons as if they're loaded. So I know in the Bureau, whenever I'm training, whenever I'm teaching, whenever I'm involved in a situation and it's live, I treat that weapon as if it's loaded. When it's time to unload, I literally will go up, drop my magazine. I will slide or pull my slide to the rear, lock it. I will look in my chamber, down through my barrel. I usually put my finger in my barrel. I'll look away. I'll go back and I'll reassess. And then even then, I don't point it at anybody. I don't, put my finger on the trigger. You just have to observe these safety rules because we don't want any Halyna Hutchins. Simple as that. You don't want to accidentally kill somebody. Alec Baldwin did not observe these rules at all. He pointed the weapon at someone off set, a cinematographer who had nothing to do with the scene, not even when the scene was going, and he pulled the trigger and killed her. Now, this is what the defense is saying. The defense is saying, and what Alec Baldwin has said on television, I fanned the trigger. I tell you, I need to get a revolver here. What he means is on revolvers, and actually on semi-automatics as well, not all, but some, you can actually take the hammer and pull back on it, considered fanning. What does that do? That makes you have a trigger squeeze that is lighter. Instead of being what we call double action, harder to pull the trigger, it now goes to single action because there's less that has to happen when you pull it for the firing pin to be struck after that hammer is released and the bullet to be fired. So he wasn't fanning the trigger. They sent that weapon to the FBI, to Quantico, for armorers to evaluate it. And they did. And they ran it through the normal protocols to make sure it was an accidental discharge, including hitting it with I believe it was a leather mallet that's used, just to say, even if you beat this thing, much less dropped it, anything like that, it's not going to go off. They were trying to prove whether it would go off, and it passed all the tests. Sadly, though, during their testing where they beat up this gun to see if they could get it to fire, which, by the way, they couldn't. The only way that gun fired was with the pull of the trigger. So Alec Baldwin is not telling the truth, in my opinion. And for those who might be asking, no, unfortunately, it wasn't being filmed because they weren't filming this particular moment. So believe it or not, no one caught this on film. But he had to have pulled the trigger. That's just been proven. And in most cases, 99.9%, that is the case unless you have a weapon that is malfunctioning. Now, they did, during these tests, cause the gun to essentially fall apart to some degree, and they had to put it back together again because they beat it up so much. That was a big point of contention. They were saying, listen, we need this case dismissed because our own armors can't see the gun in the condition it was in when when it was fired and killed Halyna Hutchins. And I actually thought that was a much better argument than the argument about the producer being introduced, because it makes a lot of sense to me that the defense would be able to call their own armors and be able to evaluate it for themselves. But nevertheless, the gun is allowed in. There was nothing dismissed. I'm sure that the FBI agent will say exactly to what degree the gun fell apart and that it's been put back to the exact same condition. I'm sure they'll be able to testify regarding those details. But in any event, that gun couldn't have fired on itself. The trigger had to be pulled. I've asked the question in a poll if you think Alec Baldwin will be called or will take the stand. I personally think he will. Look, he's an actor. He is, he's convincing. He's a convincing actor. I actually like many of the movies I've seen him in. I think he's talented. I think he can pretend to be a person and people believe it. I think he can say something that's untrue, like you have to do in the movies, and he gets people to believe it. Comes off very authentic. I think he's a good actor. Why wouldn't he take the stand and say, tell them, listen, I thought I only fanned it. Nevertheless, the gun was fired. It was fired at Halyna, and Halyna is dead. By the way, the shot also actually wounded Mr. Souza, Joe Souza, who I believe was another assistant director. Don't hold me to that, but I believe he was another assistant director. So he was also hurt, but nothing serious, obviously, nothing that caused death, and he recovered quite quickly. But I did want to get to your questions. I think he will testify. Again, we're going to get into the meat of the trial tomorrow. It's scheduled for 9 days. I think that sounds about right, especially since all the production information isn't going to be in, especially since Hannah Gutierrez is not going to be testifying. The other reason I think she's not going to be testifying, I think obviously she's very surly about really not getting the opportunity to have her sentence reduced if she would testify. So in other words, why would I scratch your back when you didn't scratch mine? I get that. The other reason I think is because she's very young and she still is an armor. She still has connections because of her father. Someday she still may want a job with Alec Baldwin. And I think that she wants to keep pure that, she's not going to turn coat on, a fairly heavy hitter in Hollywood. And I think that will help her get jobs in the future. So I think that's the two reasons we're not going to see her testify. I want to get into the chat and see what people have to say here. Got my green shirt on and got my green glasses going on. Let's see. Jen, do you think Hannah will take the stand? No. or can she take the fifth? Listen, they can call her. I think this has already been decided that she doesn't want to testify. If they subpoena her, go get her out of jail, go put her on that stand. She's just going to take the fifth. She's not going to speak, I don't think. That is my best belief in what will happen. No, I don't think she's going to say anything or testify. From bushy eyebrows, is that going to have an effect on the case that the forensic evidence is destroyed? Well, the biggest effect it should have had, I think, would have been for the judge to disallow the evidence that was gleaned from the analysis of that weapon. In other words, them saying that no, there's no way that weapon is fireable other than to have the trigger pulled. That's what the judge could have done. The judge could have dismissed the case. The judge could have, but she didn't. And it was ruled that that evidence is going to be in there. And again, my belief is it'll be cleaned up, if you will, because the FBI agent is going to testify exactly how it fell apart, how he put it back together, and that it's in the exact same condition. Now, I can tell you that FBI agent will have taken pictures before, during, and after. So this is, the FBI is meticulous in their record keeping and what they write and what they photograph. So we're going to have meticulous records. And I think that could be in part why the judge said, listen, this is so well documented. We're going to allow this weapon to be brought in. Sorry, drop my glasses. Okay. Why are real guns allowed? Yeah, we talked about that earlier. Listen, I know they want it to go bang. I know they want, smoke, but there's other weapons that could be used. I would love to see a huge change in this industry. I think armorers, there should be strict background requirements. It was interesting. I just got asked to be an armorer for a film that's coming up. And I was so excited. I'm like, yes, I'll take it. I think this would be extremely interesting work. It's something I've never done, been an armorer on a movie set. And I was thrilled to be offered the position. Then unfortunately, as the film approached, they are taking out that scene. I think part of the reason they're taking out that scene is maybe rust, being in the throes of all of this, that I think a lot of movies just don't even want to risk anything happening any further. So hopefully they'll call me the next go around, because I think it would be very interesting to be an armorer on a set and sort of to see, how things worked previously, right? Because I'm sure there'll be people there that say, wow, Jen, because I'm probably going to be so strict, they're not going to believe it. But I hope to have another opportunity. Oh, yeah, well, kind of congrats that they would even think about me. I mean, I'm just honored anytime people call to offer different jobs. And I was very thrilled about that one. But they took the scene out. So hopefully something else will come on. Yeah, it would be cool. I think it's just cool. All these different jobs. I mean, I think most of you know, I completely happened into this industry at all, meaning this industry that I'm in now. And that was through the Gabby Petito case. For those of you who don't know, and I don't want to bore anybody, but essentially what happened was a classmate of mine through Quantico that was in what we call New Agents Training class. We were both in the same class, went through months and months and months of training together. We started in November and ended in March. Anyway, after he left the FBI, he became a contributor for ABC. Specifically, his specialty was terrorism. Where mine is gangs, violent crime, organized crime. His was terrorism. And but he commented on a lot of different cases for ABC. I think he was with them 7 years, I believe, if I recall correctly. And anyway, he took a new job. Now he's in charge of security at casinos that are owned by Native Americans. Now, some people might be saying, why aren't you saying indigenous? Well, I can tell you I'm Apache, Mescalero Apache. My great grandmother, full-blooded, was on the reservation in New Mexico. And I know my whole family, my lineage does not want to be called Native American, Indians, anything like that. They want to be called by their tribe. They're Apache or they're Navajo or they're Creek. So, and then also it was really an honor to be able to work with a full-blooded individual that I worked with in the Virgin Islands, and we remained friends for many years. He's an amazing guy. All I can tell you, the nickname I called him was Mags, and he was actually Cree and I think Chippewa. He was from Oklahoma, still back in Oklahoma. One of the fastest runners I've ever been around in my life, but I completely have digressed now. But anyway, that's why I didn't say indigenous for those who were asking, or for those who may have wondered why I didn't use that term, since it's kind of the new politically correct term to use. But in any event, in getting back to these questions, I completely digressed. Do you think Alec will testify? Yes, I really do think he'll testify. I spoke on this a little bit earlier, and I think he'll testify quite specifically because he's an actor, he's convincing, and I think he'll try to convince the jury that he never pulled that trigger. And it's going to be the most important acting job he's had, because he's going to have to convince them of that. Are there any other questions? My mods putting up any questions here? Let's see, Bishop and Bell. Will testifying hurt him? So in most cases, like in the Alec Murdaugh case, I said, no way in heck he should testify. The Karen Reed trial, I said, no, absolutely no way for her, because she's said so many inconsistent statements already in public, and it's been filmed. They would have just annihilated her credibility. So it would have been a hot mess. In 99% of the cases, I would say the defendant shouldn't testify unless one of two things. One, they're truly innocent, and so their story is very believable because it's not a story, it's the absolute truth. Secondarily, I think people should also testify if it's just a Hail Mary. In other words, if you believe you've lost, your defense counsel is saying, listen, things are looking terrible, and you're just throwing up a Hail Mary, hoping to get through to one juror as you explain your story. And then in this case, so there's 3 instances. This is the 3rd instance. And this is an instance where I think a lot of people are going to feel sorry for Alec Baldwin. I think they're going to say, listen, he depended on these people that were hired to have his back, to hand him a gun that was loaded with blanks, not with real ammunition. Yes, he was horsing around. Yes, he pulled the trigger. But come on, he needs to be able to rely on the people he hires to make sure he's not put in a position where he could harm anyone. So you add that all together, plus his fine speaking skills. He's a handsome guy. A lot of people are going to know him from the film industry. And for this reason, I think it's worth a shot. And I think he'll take the stand. I think he should take the stand, but we'll see. These are great lawyers he has. And really great lawyers usually want to keep their defendants off the stand at all costs. All right, let's see. Do you think any of the basic firearms rules were followed? No, none of them were followed. And if they would have followed any of them, any of the 3 I mentioned earlier, this would have never happened. If you don't point the gun at anybody that you're not justified to shoot, like in this case, it wouldn't happen. If your finger weren't on the trigger when you're not justified to shoot, it wouldn't happen. And if you would have treated it like it was loaded with live ammunition, it wouldn't have happened. So he broke all 3. And if you break one of the 3, you're in a lot of trouble. I also want to say this, and this is a very important point. What if the scene would have been to shoot himself? Shoot himself in the leg, shoot himself in the foot, horsing around in some way, through the hand, some way. What if the scene would have been written that way? My contention, you can better believe he would have checked to make sure those rounds were all blanks. Because when it's your life, when it's your body, when it's your flesh, you're going to make sure, because he knew that fired real rounds. But when you don't, maybe you're a little bit more careless. Let's see. No. Does blank the actual, so in the gun, you could not tell the difference between if it was loaded with real versus blanks, but the actual rounds do feel different, lighter. So the real live rounds are full of lead, and the brass casing, most of them are brass. The cheap ones are aluminum and other alloys, but the good firearms rounds are actually brass casings and then lead, so they are much heavier than, I shouldn't say much, but they are heavier than a blank round. Let's see. Do you think Alec will get the maximum prison sentence? So do I think he will, or do I think he should? Listen, I think he should. And let me tell you why. You've got Halyna Gutierrez, who's a young woman, much less savvy, didn't pull the trigger, ultimately responsible though, but really he wasn't, right? We know. And even though it can't come out in trial, I think in sentencing, it could be considered his role as producer. And I think it would be unfair, because he decided to go to trial too. He didn't take that sweetheart plea deal. There were a lot of issues apparently with it. He was going to take it, and then he didn't end up taking it. But I think it would be unfair to convict and sentence Halyna Gutierrez to 18 months and to not do the same for Alec Baldwin. So it's a matter of being fair. Yes. Let's see. Has there been a civil suit? Yes. Okay. So they went ahead very early on, which was very smart, and they settled out of court. So there was a settlement reached between Halyna's family and the production and Alec Baldwin, everybody involved. But this I wanted to bring up. Do you realize, as of March 11th, 2024, they were 9 months behind on their payments? They're not paying. It's mind-boggling to me. You reach a settlement and you don't pay. Was it designed that way? So he was smart to reach a settlement early, I think, because I think it helps in his case. Listen, we reached a settlement. The family didn't sue us. We ended everything, in a good way. Only they're not getting paid. At least that's the latest I read. If anybody in chat knows any update from that, please let me know. But my understanding is they're behind and are not paying. Who pulled the trigger in the Crow? Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. That was the case I was referring to, where it did happen before. And the person who died, I believe, you're taking me back, but I believe it was Bruce Lee, the famous karate actor. I believe it was his son. I'm going to say that was killed. And they actually wanted to bring up that case in that instance, the prosecution did, to show, listen, there's been precedent for this. This has happened before. And I don't know what they ended up ruling, but I know I thought it shouldn't be brought in because I remember the circumstances were so different in terms of what happened. It wasn't negligent to the point that this was at all. And I remember. Sorry, I remember. I'm going back into my memory. That was a long time ago, but let me tell you why. In that case, there were blanks in the gun. but the load was ultra explosive. It wasn't made correctly, and that projectile ended up being a lethal projectile rather than a non-lethal projectile. And that is why, to me, the case is so much different, because, and I believe no one was charged in that. No one was charged. I'm going back into my memory bank right now. So if I end up being wrong, I'll look it up before the next live, but I believe no one was charged. And it was because no one really did anything wrong, but the manufacturer of the blanks. That's who was at fault, the manufacturer. So nobody on the set, no directors, no one got in trouble. Great question. Who was that? I wanted to put that up there. And Amanda RNNC is verifying what I said. It was Bruce Lee's son. That's what I had recalled. Thanks for looking that up. Bushy Eyebrows, do you think a firearm safety expert will testify? I mean, he broke every rule. Absolutely, they're going to have an expert to testify. I have a case, one of my expert cases that hasn't gone to trial yet. We're still, I'm preparing the expert witness report. But it's a firearms type safety case too. And they'll definitely have an expert on. Definitely. You got to have an expert on to talk about firearm safety and all the rules that were broken. And yeah, they should have an expert that they called. I have not seen their expert witness list. I actually need to look at that to see who they've listed as the expert. But the prosecution should definitely have an expert on, and the defense should find somebody that says, listen, no. There wasn't a rule broken. There wasn't a rule broken. You're going to want an expert to say both. Now, how an expert could ever defend what was done, I don't really know, but it can happen. Experts can be paid a lot of money, unfortunately, bad experts, to say things that really aren't of expert quality and caliber. And I think anybody would say that he didn't do anything wrong is not a good expert in this situation. Have they finished jury selection? I believe they finished today. In fact, I know they did. And they have 4 alternates. So 12 and 4 alternates, I believe. Yes. Let's see. In the interrogation of Alex, said there was only 1 live round in the gun. When did he find that out? So that is a very interesting situation. It's like what you see in a revolver. It goes around slowly. And actually what's interesting is he should have been able to see just by looking at it that he did not have a blank round. You can tell it just by looking at it. And they have to creep over. So it's really terrible that the 1 round he ended up firing, everything in the cylinder, including that 1 round. It's just horrible, or just that 1 round. I actually don't know, and I'd love to see if in chat, because I don't know this answer, if every bullet was fired that was in his gun. I'm going to be looking for that. Mods, if you could look for that to see if anybody knows if every bullet was fired or not. Did Alec have anything to do with Hannah getting the job as an armorer? Well, he did in this sense. He was the producer, and the buck stops with the producer. So yes, I mean, he's the boss, he's the man, and she doesn't get the job if he says no. So from that standpoint, even though I'm sure it was a couple of levels up, 100% that the buck stopped with him. But that's not going to be allowed in, by the way. The judge ruled nothing about his role as the producer. Do you think Alan will get the maximum prison sentence? Jennifer, yes, that was asked. And I think he should, but I doubt he will. I don't think he will. It'll be interesting to see how he acts before this jury. Is he laughing? Is he making smug faces? Is he, acting in any sort of negative way? When things like that happen, it can tee off judges. So we'll have to see with that. Everybody, I really want to thank you all for joining tonight. I'm sorry about the time change from earlier. Had a couple of things I didn't plan on happening come up, but I just want to thank you all for being here and for being a part of this channel, and for all your chat comments. I look at all of them for the most part. Sometimes I might miss some, but I try to look at all of them when I can after everything is over. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And I want to make sure there's not any other one. It was a single arm round. That's what Bishop and Bell said. I should have known that answer. And thanks for answering that, because I wasn't sure. So imagine the horrible, I'm not going to call it luck, lack of luck, if you will, that just one round was fired. And it was the round that was live. Terrible. In any event, tonight, thinking about Halyna Hutchins' family, about her husband, her son, and her family, her Ukrainian family, and all they have suffered through this, because it's been a lot. And I look forward to next week, Monday, seeing you all again on Missing Monday. And until the next time, may justice be served.